I heard someone claim that the rack chin was easiest at the top and hardest at the bottom, which is something you would want in a pulling profile. You want something that gets gradually easier as you go through it because you get weaker as you pull back. But does the rack chin do that? Well, let's have a look through. By the way, I'm terrible at drawing this, so forgive the drawing. But let's assume that we've got this thing that the legs are going to be supported on. This is some kind of bench. And we have another thing, usually that's higher, because this is often done on something like a Smith machine. And we're going to have the hands attached to some bar position that's up here. And we're going to have someone's head. That's a terrible head, isn't it? And that's going to come through, and then they're going to have, make them a little bit longer. And they're going to have their leg somewhere up like that. This, again, the world's worst drawn human, but we'll work our way through. So what do we know about this? Well, in this position, I know this person isn't moving. And as we've touched on in previous breakdowns of this, if the person isn't moving, then the sum of the forces must be zero. Otherwise, they would be moving. So the one we're going to be interested in mostly is the torque that this is producing, the rotation that's going on. So let's label this up a little bit and figure out what's going on. So first of all, we've got this force that is pushing up at the foot, and another one where the hand is meeting whatever it is holding onto. So we have these two forces that are holding the whole weight of the person. Remember, you're lifting you are the load in this. And then the question is, well, how much is being supported by the feet? And you won't really be lifting that unless you plan on doing some kind of hip hinge style thing. And how much is in the hands? That's the bit that you're going to be lifting. So being distributed between these 2 points is a center of mass that is being accelerated down towards the floor. Let's say that center of mass is here. Ordinarily, that's found in most people around the sacrum kind of height. In this, it might actually be shifted a little higher up because there's some amount of weight over this side of the bench being supported by the feet. Now, what we've got here is, I'm going to call this center of mass, and so we're going to call that force of center of mass. Let's call this force on the hand, and let's call this force on the foot. So we know that the force from the center of mass is equal to minus the force of the hand plus force of the foot. In other words, if this is 10, that is equal to minus 5 plus minus 5, right? So minus 10 equals 10 because the two of them together has to equal 0 because the thing isn't moving, right? So that's what that means. But what this doesn't tell us is how much each of these actually is, because we could have, you know, minus 7 plus minus 3 or minus 10 plus 0. They're all giving us the same thing. So this doesn't tell us how much is in the hand and how much is in the foot. We need to go further. And for that, we're going to look at the torques. So when trying to find a torque, we need something to define as the axis. Now, I think it's easiest to do this one if we think of this pivot point. And so we're then going to need distances to the center of mass and distances across to the hand. So we've got a perpendicular distance to where the center of mass is. And then we also have another perpendicular distance, let's do this underneath it, out to that guy, right? Because torque, if we remember our symbol for torque, torque is equal to a force times a perpendicular distance. That's going to be our perpendicular distance. Okay, so let's give them some things. Now, I drew this earlier as a really small scale and used centimeters to do it. Because we haven't got the precise dimensions of the person, I'm going to use the centimeters on my small little drawing. And my centimeters for that, this guy right here was 18 centimeters to the center of mass, and out to the hand was 25 centimeters. So we will use that as our idea. And then we can say that the torque of the force center of mass must be equal to the torque from the force on the hand, or I should say minus the torque on the force of the hand, because look, you can see this. This guy is trying to rotate around in this direction, and this guy would be rotating around in this direction. They're going in opposing directions, so they cancel out, because again, he's not actually rotating. So the sum of the torques must be 0, which means this number must be the inverse of this number, just like we see here. So remember, torque is just saying force times perpendicular distance, so we can write this guy here as the force center of mass times, how far was that distance? 18 centimeters. I'm going to put it into meters. So times 0.18 meters must be equal to the force on the hand times its 25 centimeters in meters, 0.25 meters. Now, what we're then trying to get is the force of the hand by itself. So I'm going to divide this whole side by 0.25. And because I do that, because this equal sign, anything I do on there, if it's still going to equal, means I have to do it over on this side. So I get 0.25 meters over here. Those guys cancel out. And that equation right there gives me how much force is in the hand. In other words, how much I'm dealing with in the rack chin. So if we give this guy some weight, let's say he weighs 90 kilos. Obviously we're being accelerated by gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. So we then plug that in for the force center of mass. So what we could say here is that we've got 90 kilos times 9.8 meters per second squared times the perpendicular distance, 0.18 18 centimeters or 0.18 meters divided by 0.25 meters will be equal to the force on the hand. So let's get the calculator out and plug that in. 90 times 9.8 times 0.18 divided by 0.25 gives me 635 newtons. So the force in the hand is equal to 635, give or take, newtons. Now, if I want to know what that is in kilos, I'm going to divide by the force of gravity. So I'm going to divide by 9.8. And for that, I end up with 64.8 kilos in the hands. Now that is contingent on these ratios being correct. So that could change quite a bit depending on how far we place this bench to here, how far away it is, the structure of the person, where their mass distribution is, whatever, that's what we've got. Now if we've got the force in the hand, now we can know what the force of the foot is because now we know FC, center of mass, and the force of the hand. And essentially the force with the hand plus the force of the foot must add up to the force from the center of mass. So if I've got 90 minus 64.8, I'm going to get how much is in the foot. So let's just put that down here. So 90 kilos minus 64.8 kilos equals the force pushing up on the bench in the foot. And that is 25.2 kilos. Okay, so we've done a breakdown of how much is in what when we're looking at a rack chin. So the question, when you come up to the top of the rack chin, the only way this will get easier is if your center of mass moves across. That's the only way this is going to change. So we have to groin thrust in this direction for this stuff to have to start to change. Because the closer this center of mass gets to here, the more the bench on the foot supports the load through it. And the more that center of mass moves to here, the more it's supported by the hand. And you kind of know that intuitively to some degree. So the question, when we say that the rack chin gets easier, has a resistance profile that gets lighter, the question is, does the center of mass move towards the support on the foot as you go through it? Well, that then is going to depend upon your execution of it. So I don't know that we can say definitively that it gets easier. Now, if you then decide to also launch yourself up, I pull rapidly from that position, then the acceleration of me upwards means that once I've got that object going, that object in this instance being me, I have to produce less force. So I could use momentum, as it were, to change the resistance profile in a pulling profile to closer match it. But that gets into a slightly more complex thing, and it's certainly not unique to the rack chin. It's also not something I tend to encourage most clients to do, for the record, but it's food for thought. So, in conclusion, I don't think we can make the claim that the rack chin has that type of resistance profile. If you think I'm wrong on that, please feel free to point out where we think we've gone wrong with this.